My name is Renata Cole. I am 41 years old. 12 years into my marriage, I came home from a double shift to find my key no longer fit the front door of the house I had paid for every single month since we bought it. My mother-in-law opened the door instead, still in her church cardigan, and smiled at me like she'd been waiting all afternoon just for this moment. "Wait," she said, tilting her head. "He didn't tell you?" What she didn't know was that 6 years earlier, during a refinance, neither of them remembered clearly. I had insisted on one small change to the paperwork, a change that made everything they'd just done completely meaningless. Before I go further, if this is already making your blood boil, take a second to like and subscribe and drop your location and local time below. I read every comment. I'm Renata. This is the story of how my husband signed our house over to his mother behind my back, and how one clause I'd fought for years earlier made sure it never actually belonged to her at all. I married Marcus in 2013. He worked in logistics, steady but unremarkable pay. I was a labor and delivery nurse, and for most of our marriage, my income was the larger one, sometimes by a lot. Especially the years I picked up overnight shifts for the differential pay. When we bought the house on Larkspur Lane in 2014, a modest 3-bedroom in decent school district, financed jointly, both our names on the original mortgage and the original deed. Yet that part at least was never in question. Marcus's mother, Deborah, never fully accepted me. She'd wanted him to marry a woman from their church, someone she'd known since childhood, someone whose family she could compare notes with at Sunday dinners. I was, in her words to a cousin at our own wedding reception, a nice enough girl for what it is. I heard that secondhand from the same cousin 3 weeks after the wedding, and I decided then that I would simply outwork whatever resentment she carried instead of fighting it directly. Looking back, that was probably my first mistake. For 12 years, I paid the mortgage. Not exclusively at first, Marcus contributed his share early on, but by 2017, his contributions had grown inconsistent. A slow year at his company, a stretch of underemployment after a layoff in 2019 that lasted 11 months. I never made it a fight. I picked up more overnight shifts and the mortgage got paid every month on time, mostly from my account. In 2019, with interest rates dropping, we refinanced. I remember sitting across from the loan officer, a patient woman named Sylvia Ruiz, and asking a very specific question. I asked her to confirm in writing that the refinance would keep both our names on the deed and the new mortgage exactly as they'd been on the original. And I asked her to add a survivorship clause specifying that if anything happened to either of us, the surviving spouse would retain full and sole ownership, with no third party able to claim any interest without both signatures on file. Marcus barely looked up from his phone during that part of the meeting. Sylvia typed it into the file. Document number RF-2-019-08841. I didn't do that because I suspected Deborah specifically. I did it because I'd watched 2 friends lose homes in messy in-law situations, and I decided quietly that it would never happen to me. I never mentioned it to Marcus again after that day. I don't think he remembered it existed. Deborah's husband, Marcus's father, passed away in 2021. After that, she leaned on Marcus more and more, financially and emotionally, and he let her. In early 2024, she started talking, at first casually, about protecting the family assets and keeping things in the bloodline, and how young couples these days don't understand how quickly marriages can fall apart. I heard these comments the way you hear weather forecasts you don't plan around. I should have planned around them. In March of this year, Marcus told me Deborah's accountant had suggested some estate planning just to simplify things down the road, and that he needed my signature on a few documents. I asked what documents. He said something vague about a trust, something to protect the house from unnecessary complications if anything ever happened to either of his parents. I told him I wasn't comfortable signing anything without reading it fully first. He said he'd have his mother's attorney send it over. He never did. What actually happened, I learned much later, was this. Marcus went to Deborah's attorney alone in April and signed a quitclaim deed transferring his interest in the Larkspur property to his mother, Deborah Cole, believing apparently that this was a reasonable way to protect the house from a marriage he'd started quietly doubting after 11 years of financial strain and a mother who never stopped whispering in his ear. He never told me. He never got my signature because the attorney, a woman named Patricia Voss, had apparently told him a quitclaim only required the signature of the party transferring their own interest. What neither Marcus nor Patricia Voss checked was the 2019 refinance file. My name wasn't just on the deed as a co-owner. The survivorship and joint consent clause she'd insisted on meant any transfer of any ownership interest in the property required both signatures on file with the county recorder, or it would be recorded as invalid on its face. Marcus's signature alone, no matter what Deborah's attorney told him, legally accomplished nothing. Nobody told me any of this was happening. On June 9th, I came home from a 12-hour shift and my key didn't turn. I stood on my own porch for a full minute, assuming I'd grabbed the wrong keys before Deborah opened the door herself, wearing the cardigan she wore to church. Holding a box of my own kitchen items she'd apparently already started packing. "Wait," she said, smiling in a way I will remember for the rest of my life. "He didn't tell you." I asked her what. Exactly. He hadn't told me. She said the house was hers now, that Marcus had signed it over properly in April, that a locksmith had come that morning, and that she'd be moving in for now while things get sorted. My 6-year-old niece, visiting for the summer and standing behind Deborah in the doorway, looked up at me and asked, "Aunt Ren, is this not your house anymore?" I told her I needed to make a phone call, and I sat down on my own front steps and called Sylvia Ruiz's office, the same lender from 2019, and asked them to pull the recorded file. They confirmed it within the hour. The 2019 refinance document RF-2019-08841 included the joint consent clause exactly as I remembered it. Any subsequent transfer of ownership interest required both signatories, or it would not be recognized as valid at the county level. Marcus's April quitclaim deed, signed alone, had never actually transferred anything. Deborah did not own the house. She had, at most, changed the locks on a house that legally still belonged, in full, to me and my husband jointly, exactly as it had for over a decade. I called Marcus next. He answered, sounding relieved, like he'd been waiting to be caught so someone else could finally handle the fallout. I asked him one question. "Did you know about the survivorship clause from the 2019 refinance?" Long silence, then quietly, "I forgot that was even in there." I told him I hadn't forgotten anything. I drove to a locksmith myself that evening, a different one, and had the locks changed back before Deborah returned from wherever she'd gone to celebrate. I called Patricia Voss's office directly the next morning and asked her on record whether she'd reviewed the original 2019 mortgage documents before drafting the quitclaim deed for her client's son. There was a long pause before she said she would need to review her file and call me back. She never called back. I later learned through the county recorder's public notice that the quitclaim deed had been formally rejected and marked invalid within 9 days of filing. Deborah showed up at the house one more time a week later with a locksmith of her own in tow and found her key didn't work either. I watched from the kitchen window as the same locksmith who'd helped her the first time explained, somewhat sheepishly, that he couldn't override a legally recorded joint consent restriction without both owners present. She stood on the porch for a long moment, the same porch where she'd smiled at me 2 weeks earlier, and then she left without a word. Marcus and I are in counseling now. I haven't decided yet whether the marriage survives what he was willing to do quietly without telling me simply because his mother asked him to, but the house at least was never actually in question, not for one single day, because 6 years before any of this happened, I sat across from a loan officer and asked one careful question nobody else in my life thought to ask. Some people protect their future with confrontation. I protected mine with a single clause in a refinance document, filed away and forgotten by everyone except me. Deborah wanted to know if he'd told me. He hadn't needed to. I'd already told the county everything they needed to know, 6 years in advance.